Okay, we're live. Apologies to anybody that's out there. We had a little bit of technical difficulties getting things situated, but
Just a
better,
little.
yeah, better late than never. Welcome everybody. It's been a while, so let us take a deep breath and just get situated. Um, Welcome, Cassandra, for being back here with me to do this live chit chat. I appreciate you taking time to do it and your patience for figuring all this out.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and having patience as well.
So we talked about this is called living unleashed, right? We're just going to dive right into this. So here's a question I want us to start with, which might not have been something you were expecting, but I think it really starts off the conversation in a way that dives into other topics that we want to talk about. So, and we'll both answer this. You're not the only one on the spot,
Well,
but
that's good.
imagine for a moment that you wake up tomorrow with no limitations and no expectations, complete freedom. What's the first thing you do? What's the first thing you would do, and why?
Oh my gosh. Wow. Probably travel.
Okay.
Yeah, probably travel. Just because there's a lot of the world I want to experience. And I feel like I have a lot of interest in understanding other cultures, other ways of being and living and operating. And that's something that, yeah, I guess in my present circumstance, I probably have felt a little bit limited in the ability to experience. So, gosh, it's so interesting because really I can't think of a lot that I would change. It's like I'm
Well, and
trying to sit
that's
into it and really think about that.
well,
That's
that's a
yeah.
safe answer, right? And
Uh,
so, we all think about I would travel more, or I would,
yeah.
do the things. But let's take it a level deeper, and where we're getting into
Okay.
this conversation is, who would you be
Hmm.
without limitations, without expectations?
Yeah.
What parts of yourself would you show to the world that maybe you're not?
Oh gosh. I mean, yeah, I'd like to be on stage. Whether speaking or I'm ex- singing or acting. Oh, yeah.
That's still
And
safe.
it doesn't feel safe to me. Man, you're pushy. No, just kidding.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
because
but no, I
that's the
mean,
whole point of this topic today, right? Is really
yeah.
diving into more parts of our personality
Mm-hmm.
that we hide,
Yeah.
right? Because living unleashed, you and I have talked about this off camera, at depth, and we both have had conversations with multiple people about this, but it's really the masks we wear
Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah.
limit us and that we judge by beliefs. And so to me, when I say living unleashed, it's not, yes, travel is great and those goals that we have are great and the things we're scared to do are great, but that isn't really true freedom,
Mm.
right? True freedom is, how do we show up as ourselves authentically? How do we show those parts of ourselves that we don't want others to see, we protect, we
Yeah.
think, we guard our hearts, which I say this because there is no control or guarding really. It's an illusion, but that's a topic for another time. Or I might dive into this a little bit. But what
Yeah.
part of you, because you had an interesting experience, especially in the last 4 or 5 months.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Hmm. Yeah. I am hearing you. Yeah, no, that's interesting, and I definitely hear what you're saying as far as safe answers. And I think what's interesting is I'm noticing when you ask me that question, my go-to is more about. I'm surprised to find it's more about feeling freedom of personal expression of some sort. I was surprised because, as someone very ambitious, I thought my answer would be like, I want my book published and I want, this, and I want to reach this amount of people. I'm kind of surprised that when you ask that, while my answers do sound safe, they are ultimately speaking a desire to express my personal passion and self,
Okay.
which yeah, yeah.
You gonna circle back around to that question I asked, or are we're gonna stay in the safe zone?
Okay, tell me the question again. I'm being fully present.
Well, and it's difficult for some people to get
Mm-hmm.
in touch with those sides, right? That we know, especially with social media or people we're dating or family, where they judge us,
Mm-hmm.
right? People have a preconceived notion of who are we, how are
Yeah.
we, how should we show up in the world, and so we edit sometimes our personalities because they feel like a burden
Yeah.
or they're
Okay.
not going to be seen or loved or appreciated. So back to that original question of like, if there was no expectations, nobody had
Mm-hmm.
any expectations of you, nobody had any limitations on you, how would you show up in the world?
Mm.
What would you be doing that you're not doing now?
Right. So it's not, so my answer was just expression. What you're saying is like, okay, expressing what?
Right.
Like take it deeper. Okay. Um yeah. I probably would be a little more open with my emotions.
Mm-hmm.
I probably would be a little more eccentric in my attire. I probably would speak a little freer without all the analytical processing of, because while I'd like to say that I do pretty good about being open and expressive, yeah, I probably am to some point constantly filtering like what is going to be most socially acceptable and what I say. There's that subconscious layer there. Yeah. Does that answer a little deeper?
I don't know. Do you think it does?
I think it does. How about you? I'm flipping the script. I'm putting you under the hot seat now. How about you? What if you woke up tomorrow? Yeah, same question. Totally.
I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, there's not. I think again, we innately want to go to what we would do,
Yeah.
right? Which says a lot about us and how we don't know how to show up as ourselves because we think we are what we do, but we're not what we do, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
not the author, you're not the CEO, you're not, those are things, those are parts of things you participate in, but that's not who you are. So I think for me right now, it's just part of that journey of opening my heart up to the fullest it can be and putting myself in situations that really challenge my beliefs.
Mm.
So, I think if there was no expectation or limitations, not even so much expectations, because I tend to be a rebel. I do. Right. I tend to be a rebel and I tend to kind of go against, not on purpose, not for, some people would say, oh, you're a rebel for rebel's sake. And it's like, no, I'm a rebel just innately who I am. You know what I mean? It's just, I'm very big on being me. as authentically. I mean, one of my favorite quotes was Gandhi's, "Be the change you want to see in the world." Like literally embody it. It's one thing to
Yeah.
say you want these things, but to embody it is a whole different genre. So for me, it isn't so much of the expectations, but the limitations. What are the limitations I put on myself, and especially my own beliefs about people? So I think I would just continue to put myself more so than I do now in situations that are awkward, unusual, uncomfortable, something I wouldn't necessarily do,
Yeah. Like what?
like going to a nude beach.
Okay.
You know
Okay.
what I mean? Like that's not something I would typically do. And I know people have heard me on the podcast before, probably where I booked myself in a clothing optional Airbnb.
Hmm.
Not something I would typically do, and that really came for me from a friend who I was camping with, who is totally secure in her body, totally like just does not care what anybody thinks, and embraces that side. And I'm like, what triggers that in somebody, right? Like, where does
Yeah.
that confidence come from? Because I don't have that, and I know
Yeah.
that.
Hmm.
So that's my easiest answer, I guess.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's interesting. I think, and I tend to be analytical. Um, and so, my thoughts on that would be, to kind of take it, a step further. I'm trying to put myself like in those shoes. And I'm thinking, kind of like, the why for myself of like, because it's interesting you say that, because I mean, I'll be honest, I like being nude. Like, I when I'm around a lot, in the comfort of my own home. And I'm like hearing you say that, and I'm like, that's interesting. I think it's natural for us to want to like feel into the other person's shoes. And so I'm thinking to myself, what would that feel like? Like, what would I get out of that for myself? And it's so funny because my thought would be how uncomfortable it would be for other people there to experience me on the beach nude. Which is interesting because we're talking about confidence, and it's like, yeah, could I do it? Yes, I feel like I could do it, but at the same time, it's interesting to think that my brain processes is like not like what, I don't know, like what would that be like for everybody else? Does that make sense? It's weird. It's random.
No, I mean, I think we no, I think we all can consider that, right? It's
Yeah.
we worry about what other people think
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
more than we really should, because
Yeah.
people really don't care that much. And I don't, and I say that, and it can sound really harsh, and people are like, "Oh my God," but they really don't. People
Yeah.
glance.
Yeah.
They don't pay attention to details. They don't read. I've had utmost a million experiences where I could prove this. People
Mm-hmm.
don't pay a close attention to things as people think most people do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we're really just glancing, and when we're glancing, our brain is filling in the details,
Yeah.
and sometimes those details aren't accurate.
Yeah. Right. Right. So then it would be like what that experience felt like for you if you took outside of that. And then I'm just thinking of all the sand and the weird crevices, and like I don't really like the beach. So
Well, I mean,
there might be another atmosphere. I'd appreciate the nudity a little bit more.
well, I mean, I think it's the freedom, right, of being.
Yeah.
Here's the other thing that a friend recently did it, and something I learned in staying at Airbnb was when you lose the clothing, you lose your armor.
Yeah. Yeah.
You lose a certain sense of people judging you by the latest brand or the latest
Right.
jewelry or your makeup. Like,
The fit,
you're
even like how your clothes fit and what,
right.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Like,
colors and
there's
yeah.
nothing but the rawness of who you are. And so, if we can't, which proposes another question, I guess, if we can't do that physically, how do we do that emotionally?
Yeah. Right. Mm.
Right.
Yeah.
Those things kind of go hand in hand in the fact of I can't accept the physical in somebody raw and not judging them, then how can I do it emotionally?
Yeah, and that's hard. Like that's a hard one for me. I'm realizing and it's interesting because that's something I feel like I'm going through right now in my life with some major changes I've had. And I've realized that for me, as far as my relationship with emotion, and I also associate it with vulnerability in the sense of like when we're talking about someone seeing the emotion or expressing the emotion. And it's interesting because I've always considered myself someone that felt completely open. Like I felt completely open in that area. I feel like I can talk about a lot of vulnerable things. But what I'm realizing is that was a lot easier for me to do in the comfort of my blissed out spiritual bubble that I put myself in for the
Mhm.
last 3 years, because it's like, yes, there are emotions and I had expressions, but it's like it hasn't been until I've been in a place in my life where kind of like everything familiar shifted all at once, which put me out of sorts. Well, when that happens, my go-to is it's not safe. Things aren't safe. Like where's my footing? Where's my grounding? And so the natural reaction for me in that case is to become hyper fixated on control and appearing okay. Like when you feel like your world is crumbling, I've it brings up this feeling of feeling like, that I am not falling apart. So it's like vulnerability then when things feel shifty is very different. And yeah, it is hard for me to then express my emotions, even my voice. Like I can tell my voice is like I'm feeling it in my voice as I'm speaking, like the underbelly of, and it's like that fixation on masculine expression. Everything is safe, everything's secure, everything is fine. I'm okay, because if you're okay, that's good. Like if you don't feel okay, if you have a bad day, if you're emotional, if you're going through things, then that feels like weakness. And so that's been a hard one. Yeah, that's been one I've been working through lately to be able to express emotion in those circumstances when life feels shifty versus when it feels safe and protected. And it's like, yes, I have this little emotion and it's okay, I'll share it with you. But this one over here, when I feel like, yeah, I'm not sharing that. So yeah, it's
It's interesting that
working.
you
Yeah.
equate emotions to weakness.
Yeah, yeah, that you could say that's interesting.
Well, and I think I think it's that kind of leans into, right. We went on a trip this past weekend, to a wonderful place in South Carolina, a treehouse, and you definitely had some challenges. And,
Thanks for that.
but I mean, I
I
think it's
mean, if I'm really thinking about it, and I think there might have been like one bad day, one hard, yeah, like one, maybe like tiny. No,
no,
not buying.
no. There's quite a few. And
Thanks.
and it creates this conversation of, it came up in my podcast with the anthropologist where, she didn't like we talked about the names of divine masculine and feminine and its energy, and I understand her perspective on that. But for the sake of this podcast and what we're talking about, masculine, feminine energy, regardless of your gender,
Yeah.
I think it's important, and especially in the work you do with people, is discerning what that is, because you had a lot of feminine energy coming out this weekend that you really struggled with
Mm-hmm.
this past trip. You know what I mean? Like it was really it was a wrestling match.
You make it sound so entertaining to watch.
Well, no, but I mean to the point of, and I think this is
Yeah.
what's important is, right, like especially people assume women
Yeah.
handle emotion much better than men. But that is not the case always.
Yeah, no. Yeah. And kind of going back to your point of like that masculine feminine expression, we all have that. So it's impossible to define, labels of, yeah, like you said, women can handle them easier. And I'm just vulnerably sharing in this moment that I am biting my tongue to not say all of the reasons why, I have this expression through my chart, as we have, gave an incredible point to me recently that I posted on Instagram, that it's like, as if we keep going back to those stories,
Yeah.
we're kind of using it as excuses. And so I'm biting my tongue to give the astrological reasonings to why that is, and instead choosing to say, generalizing that yes, it is something I'm working through. I tend to absolutely be more comfortable in the logical and the masculine, in that expression, when it comes to nurturing and holding space, emotions and expression, they're definitely all things that I am learning to come into. And to your point also, yes, it was very unusual for me to feel such a sudden overwhelm of the feminine expression on our trip, and it was very new for me, and it was like, what the hell do I do with this? So going back to living unleashed, in that it's like I've been looking at, okay, like you said, equating that to weakness, when I made that
Wait.
statement.
Before we kind of broad stroke this, I'd like to
Oh,
really
God.
kind of give an example of what we're talking about, because
Okay.
it's
All
great
right.
to leave things broad stroked, but so I would like you to talk about the bridge and the mud.
Okay. All right. Okay. I will do that, Beckett. Thank you so much. Talk about vulnerability. Okay, so yes, so we had a wonderful time watching the sun come up, and it was so great because I was feeling the energy of the nature, which I love. I love nature. And I didn't think I had expectations for our trip, but in that moment, I realized that I did. And one of those was I wanted a lot of spiritual experiences. And so I was so excited. I was feeling nature, and I was like, oh, hell's yes, I'm going to have this blissed out connection, meditation. And, I told you, I was like, I want to do it by myself. I'm just going to like soak in every ounce of this goodness. And so I found this spot when we got there, and as you said, there was a bridge and there were trees, and instantly I felt energetically connected to it. I was like, this is the spot. This is where I'm going to connect with God, and have this transcendent experience with nature. And so I was so excited to go out, and I was like, I'll probably be a while. And I think I might have even bragged, like, I can meditate for like 2 hours, So I'm thinking, I'm just going to have this beautiful experience. So I walk out there, and I found a spot, I found a tree. I sat down, I kind of dug my hands into the dirt while I was sitting there, getting that good connection, soaking in all the vibes. And I sat there, and there was like not much. And I started to hear my guide speak to me, which I also feel like I was speaking to, let's be honest, the tree that I was sitting in front of. I felt very connected to this one specific tree. And so I started to hear things, and I started to have like situations come up where I was uncomfortable. And it was interesting because I don't even know, Beckett, if I shared this with you, but the more things came up, the more disciplined I wanted to be, to like pull all distractions aside and like just really, be so spiritual that I can just like ignore anything and just like just zone in. And was it happening? And what ended up coming through was a little harsh, and my guides were essentially were like, mm-mm, no, I don't think so. And they were like, you've done this, you know this, this is your security blanket, which I didn't love the language of that really. So and they said it's time for the messy parts, it's time to live life, to participate in life. And they said, go put your feet in the mud. And I was like, that's okay. So I sat there and I was like, no, I was like, that's beautiful, I hear what you're saying, let's talk more about it, let's just really connect, and I tried again and it wasn't happening. So I thought, okay, well, maybe if I move. So I moved from the tree and sat on the bridge. And I sat there and I looked at nature and I'm like, oh, nature, you're so beautiful. And my feet were dangling over the river. And they were like, go put your feet in the mud. And I was like, no, it's not really that. That's probably just in my head. That's not my guides. Like, I don't need to put my feet in the mud. And I fought it and I fought it and I fought it. I laid down and I was like hearing the wind again, trying to bliss out. Like I just kept trying. And they were eventually like, this woman, So I'm laying there and all of a sudden, all of these ants, no lie, all of these ants started coming all over me. I don't know where they came from. Like there was no ants on the bridge, but my guides are like, anything to get my butt up off of that bridge and participating in life. And so I was not happy. So when I saw you were out doing your naturey type living moment messy thing, and if I remember correctly, I wasn't probably all that kind to you. I'm sorry. But yeah, I don't remember I'm sure you do, the ins and outs of that conversation. But essentially, I remember asking you what you were doing. And you're like, I'm going to be getting in the water. And I was like, of course you are. And so
I was actually going to get in the mud because there was clear quartz crystals in the dirt that I wanted to.
So of course, I was like, of course, here we are. He could have answered anything. Of course, that's what he's gonna go do. And so I fought it. I fought it. And what ended up happening is I fought it so long it was ridiculous. You were like, get in the mud, and I wouldn't do it. And then finally, my shoe caught and flung mud all up my legs, my crotch, everything. I was covered in mud and I was like, okay, all right, so I guess I'm getting in the mud. And then I did. And then later that day, I went back and I wanted to do it again because I wanted to do it 100% for myself without resistance. And I did it. But it was.
Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's coming across that this was a very playful moment.
It was hard.
It was not.
There may have been tears.
Yeah, there was a lot of tears, and there was nothing playful about it. It was actually way more somber than we're making it seem.
Except when the mud went all up me.
Well, the mud going up was funny. You know what I mean? That was funny to me. It wasn't funny to you.
Was it funny to me?
And the reason I bring that up is because something as simple as that, getting messy, and a lot of people equate emotions with mess. And like I said, it really doesn't matter your gender. If you tend to be more structured, if you tend to be more controlling, and we have a big control issue in the society, we think we can control things. We can't control anything, quite honestly. You can't. Yeah. That's a whole nother topic for a different time. But you find that people who really have to be able to tap into that feminine energy, that flow, that nature of emotion without judgment can be very difficult for people. And that's really what your guides were trying to get you to do, is to step in the mess. Because right? Nobody likes to cry. Nobody loves to feel angry. Nobody likes the messy emotions, yet that's why we're here,
Yeah.
is to feel all the emotions. And so I think when we're talking about living unleashed, yes, it's the taboo topics, and yes, Tantra and all that stuff that we put in there is part of it, but you have to have a good foundation, I think, and I would love your insight on that, on these two energies. They have to be, you have to
Yeah.
be able to dip into both of them and ride those waves and understand that sometimes the more proactive, masculine, structured, forward movement needs to come out, and other times it's more flow and it's more gentle and it's more messy and sometimes it's emotional. You know what I mean? A lot of times it's emotional. You have to be able to sit with that too and understand, like the mud. The reason I kept telling her get in the mud is I knew one of two things was going to happen, and this is what the universe does. It gives you opportunities to step into those,
Mm-hmm.
right? It was giving her an opportunity to step into that mud. But when you don't,
Mm-hmm.
when you refuse, it bitch slaps you. And that's what we
Oh yeah.
call it. The universe will push you into it one way or another. And so that's why the flip flop is so funny, because she was doing everything to stay out of it. And the minute she went to step on dry land, which was actually mud, pure mud, like it wasn't even the stream, it was mud. And her flip flop just went threw it all over her. It was the universe saying, okay, we gave you a chance to step into it,
Yeah.
right?
And I almost fell over even when I got in the water. I was trying so hard to like fight, like keeping my feet from touching the slime. Oh my gosh, the slimy. Shh,
That throat
shh,
chakra.
be quiet. I'm touching the slimy rocks as much as possible, and it's like the more I fought it, I was like falling, and you were like, yeah, you either do it or they're gonna like face plant you into this mud. Keep it up. And but to your point, yeah, it was the fact that it was so hard, something so simple, and that's why there was that part of me that's honestly what encouraged me to go back in, because my logic in that moment was so angry almost, because I was like, this should not be, this should not be that hard. And yes, to the emotion I am trying to, control right now, it was hard. And it's something so simple. And I was so frustrated because I was like, this should be easy. It should be. But to your point, I knew it wasn't about just the mud. The exercise wasn't about what are we gonna do today? I don't know. Let's stick Cassandra in some mud. Well, why? I don't know. It'll be fun. It was symbolic.
Yeah.
And it was, boy, was it a domino effect of a chain reaction of things that happened the days that followed after that moment, and bringing very obviously into my awareness all the ways in which I don't participate, which if we're talking about living unleashed, I mean, what other definition of the opposite of that can you possibly have? And like you said, with, sexuality and expression and intimacy and all of these things, like, and we're, Tantra is life force energy. It is the balance of it's woven, the masculine and feminine. So like you said, it's, you have to be able to embrace all of the parts, all of the pieces, and feel like one is not weaker, one is not stronger, and they have to be in harmony. And that is what causes us to feel the freedom and the liberation that we want to experience in life.
It really does. And I mean, I know people are wondering, they're like, well, what were you doing? I was being a Taurus.
He was, very much so.
I was playing, but I think I've done so much work. I know, and Cassandra could probably equate to this. My masculine, feminine energy is pretty well balanced. Not that we don't have work to do, we all do, and all that things. That's not what I'm saying, but I'm just saying I find it very
Show off?
easy.
No, just kidding.
easy to flow in and out. Well, and to that point,
Yeah.
having somebody who is balanced and then being able to be there with you to kind of support you and help
Yeah.
you through those moments were beneficial.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I didn't take it personally, and I knew this was something she had to kind of just surrender to. And it was like that meditation kicked off just a ton of events for the rest of the weekend. And I was getting, like, even when we would pull cards, they were very like, you need to do this and you need to be to me. It was just like, connect to Gaia and crap. And just be present and,
Mm-hmm.
commune with all the animals and bugs and insects. And so it was interesting. You can take, and this is another good point. You take two people in the same environment who had two very different experiences,
Mm-hmm.
right? None was better or worse, they just were.
Yeah.
But we had the same place, we were in the same, like everything was the same except we had very different experiences personally.
Yeah. And
Um,
I think another piece that I would like to add to that too, going back to that expression of masculine and feminine, is one of the hard things for me for that trip was that was was that don't make me laugh. So whenever I talk to Beckett, my throat chakra gets activated. And so I cleared my throat. Every podcast we've done together, any conversations. And so it's
it's a very
yeah,
Taurian thing.
it
Throat.
is.
We are ruled really by our
The
throats.
throats,
Yeah.
yeah. So, anyways, but going back to another piece to your point of how you talked about the two different experiences and looking again at that expression of masculine feminine, my backstory is I grew up in a very manipulated, home environment. So another aspect of that trip that was hard for me is I have for the past 3 years since my spiritual awakening really honed into being sort of like in charge of my own awareness and reality. So having someone that was able to mirror different things and perspectives back to me, oh, that was fun. Like, that was really fun for me. But once again, it showed that expression of, it's not okay for someone else to recognize or trigger these things. It's not okay for someone else to bring this awareness. Like, I need to do this myself. And I got frustrated at myself because I was like, okay, am I even doing this right? If I can't pick up on these and someone else is pointing this out, once again, that like a masculine
Control.
imbalance of expression where the feminine would be, hold that because you held beautiful nurturing space and I have so much gratitude for that, but there were moments in which it was hard for me to be in that space because I was too fixated on like you say who what about me, and I knew it was right, but it was like this internal turmoil between feeling like I somehow failed myself for not being able to figure it out. But when we do that, what are we doing? We're closing our hearts down. Like
Well, we're trying to
we're
control it,
closing. Yeah.
right? I mean, when parents or whatever chastise a child, they're controlling them. You're
Yeah.
not behaving like I want you to. So in a way, that's how we're chastising our inner child. You are
Yeah.
not behaving how I want you to or I feel comfortable with,
Right.
and therefore,
Yeah.
we beat ourselves up. So I mean, it was a lot for you. I mean, it was a lot for me to witness, but it was like I don't take anything away, and I was saying like I even said that to her when we left. Like this was a lot for you, and she would have moments of like, well, this was also a lot for you to witness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to that point, it's like, oh, I get it, but I mean, it was all beneficial and it was good, but the universe will mold us in situations even when you don't expect it, and
Right.
it's being open to those. So I think that's also part of living unleashed is right getting the messages and allowing the expectations like we talked about limitations to fall away and go let me love what this is.
Right.
whatever it's bringing up, even if it's uncomfortable. So I know you had asked, and we had asked if people had any questions. I know you have gotten one or two. Um, there's a question here of it also, so I can ask, do you want me? I'll read this one and then we can kind
Yep.
of go through.
You go first.
Okay, so this question is how do we learn to take off the masks?
Hmm. Mm-hmm. Are you answering that first or
I'll
am
let you
I?
I'll let you start it
Okay.
off.
All right. Whoo. So, how do we learn to take off the mask? I mean, really, the core of that is self acceptance, in my opinion. Feeling, but that goes by also accepting all aspect, like kind of all the conversation we just had, not attaching labels to what it should or shouldn't look like. Because if you attach labels to what the expression is according to your own perspective, then it's going to be natural for you to mask up. Like the more I felt uncomfortable in the circumstances we just talked about, the more I wanted to appear stronger than what I was. So when we're talking about taking masks off, it comes down to, I feel like, a self acceptance of not just the pretty parts, but the hard parts too, all of the pieces, and being able to look at like where you're at now and say, where I'm at now is exactly where I'm meant to be, and everything is fine just in this moment. We can always self improve, and we can always work on things, but I feel like there is a allowance and self acceptance of where we're at that's detached from, if we can accept that within ourselves and offer ourselves self love and compassion, nurture our inner child, then we can be less prone to trying to wear a mask and appear other ways. But if we are hard on ourselves and if we say this isn't okay, like I did, it's not okay for me to feel I mean, I felt constantly through that trip like I wanted to be like, I promise I'm better together than this. But really, does it need that explanation? If I could be completely self acceptant, I can accept all portions of myself and accept the present moment for what it is. So I don't know. That would be my thoughts of, redefining and nurturing self love, care for where you're at. What are your thoughts, Beckett? What would you say?
I think, we got to keep it simple. You know what I mean? Like you really do in the beginning for me. I mean, I think all those things are true and yes, but it's very difficult to say to somebody you gotta love yourself, as you know. As we all know, there's
Yeah.
moments where we look at it and go, yeah, that sounds great, but how do I do that? You know what I mean? And so I would say that the first step of really taking off your mask is figuring out what masks you're wearing.
That's good.
Where are
Yeah.
you limiting yourself based on other people's ideas of you, other people's expectations, whether that's culture, some organization, your family, society, your friends, your partner. Um, that would be the first stepping stone, I would say, is look at your life and be able to kind of look at the different areas and go, I feel good about how I show up here. I feel
Yeah.
good about the person I am in this area, but maybe over here I don't feel authentic, or I don't feel like I show up fully as me, and kind of dive into that and go, why?
Yeah.
What is the mask I'm wearing here, and why am I holding it back? Whose judgment am I afraid of?
Yeah.
Right? Whose acceptance am I not feeling like I'm getting? And a lot of the times that's where your work is, to accept yourself, right? Because if we do learn to accept ourselves in those areas, we learn that it doesn't matter what the outside world thinks of us,
Right.
because we know us and we end up loving us in that. And so that's where I would start, is just really kind of looking at the different areas of your life and go to the one that you feel the most drawn with, that you're having the
Yeah.
most trouble with, and say, what masks am I holding here?
Yeah.
And where would I like to let them go? Because that's going to start a domino effect. We
Yeah.
can't change it all at once.
Yeah. Yeah. So can I ask you to elaborate a layer on that? Okay, since we're talking about, living unleashed, and I know we mentioned talking about love and intimacy and sexuality. I feel like in hearing this question, looking at it from that perspective as well, it feels even more challenging to me. So I would be curious to hear your thoughts on, could you elaborate when it comes to wearing mask, especially when we're talking about something like intimacy and expression in that way? Would you have another added layer to that?
What do you
I'm
mean
curious.
specifically?
Yeah, like, okay, so what if someone feels like they're wearing mask as it relates to with their partner or their ability to express intimacy or their desires? Like, is there,
Well, I think it's, and this is something that people don't realize, from the LGBTQIA community, our community that, struggle with coming out or whatever, is like, the reason it's so hard to come out is because you have to get comfortable with who you are first.
okay,
And so I would say that's the same thing when you're asking, intimacy with a partner or stuff. You've gotta get comfortable with you first. If you're going to divulge this to a partner, but you're wanting them to kind of uplift you, you're wanting them to accept you, you're
mm,
wanting them to give you the okay to XYZ.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Then you're going, what is your intention behind it? Because if you haven't become solid in who you are and what you want and your needs, nobody else can validate that for you. And I
mm-hmm,
think that's the difference, at least from my perspective, with being intimate with a partner of understanding, right? Maybe you cuddle, maybe you don't. Maybe you like dominatrix or BDSM, maybe you don't. But you have to be comfortable in that and
yeah,
know that regardless of what your partner says, this is just something you need or want, and this is a part of who you are, and have a conversation that's open about this is legit part of me.
yeah,
That's a
yeah,
much different conversation than this is something I like. Would you be okay with it? Can I get your stamp of
mm-hmm,
approval? Oh, you're
right,
not okay with it, so I'll just ignore it. But that doesn't go away,
yeah,
right? That's not showing up unmasked. That's showing up with a mask and saying, I'll take this off if you say I can.
yeah,
That's a whole different.
yeah. No, that's really good. That's really good. I think that, I can just from personal experience just add to that too, that that's that's a little unnerving too, especially when you feel like you enter in a relationship under certain, even, and maybe you started off with lots of masks to begin with, and then realizing, that, because I mean, I'll just be honest for myself, like there was a lot of sexual repression, there was a lot of denial, there was a lot of shame, and so it can be then hard when you are ready to take that mask off, especially when you've been, with someone that has understood you as being one way or not. There's a lot of vulnerability in that. But also, I feel like I'm living proof that you can't live inauthentically and feel satisfied and whole in your life. And so I think I would add an extra piece to that if someone was listening and could relate in that aspect. Trust me, you want to be authentic. You want to show
Well, that's
up.
that's the key to it, and I think
Yeah,
that's where most people are not in relationships. Do you know what
yeah,
I mean? Like, and the other part of that to relationships is we're always changing.
yeah,
So if you
yeah,
think you got married to somebody or got in a long-term relationship and they're always going to be this way and they're always going to be this person, then you're entering into a false relationship
right.
because your friends change, your coworkers change, your lover, your partner, your husband, your wife, your whatever significant other you're calling them is going to change.
Yeah, yeah,
And we have to learn to be able to talk about those changes and ebb and flow. And sometimes we grow together and sometimes we grow apart. And I
right.
think that's the key to that, right? People think, well, they married me and I shouldn't be this way because they married me this way. But that is not humans.
Yeah,
That's
right.
not this journey. That's very limited thinking and that's very Right. It's because we're used to doing that and going, I'm going to edit myself to stay in this situation because this is how this person knows me, or this is, but nobody stays the same.
Right.
None of your friends do. And I think this is where the vulnerability, the feminine, the emotional, you have to be able to tap in and go, mm-mm, this is important to me. You know, I see a lot of couples too, and tapping in some relationships with me. It's like people assume because you've been with somebody, they should know what you need.
Mm. Yeah.
That is the biggest selfish thing to ever think about somebody because most people don't even know what they need themselves.
Right. Right. Yeah.
You ask somebody, what do you need? And they're like, I don't know. Oh, okay, but you expect your partner to know.
Right. Exactly.
They're supposed
Yeah.
to know what you, well, we've been together 30 years. I know there's people been together 30 years and they have no idea, don't know anything about each other.
Right. Right.
Right? Because we get comfortable. So, what does it hurt us to say, how can I support you in this moment?
Mm.
What do you need from me?
Yeah.
You know, let's talk about that. Why is that important to you, even sexually? Why does that turn you on? What is it about that that you want to experience? Like, again, being open to the discussion of what it is and allowing ourselves to be more vulnerable will create more open and loving relationships with more intimacy, which then you can get into the tantra because you can't get there
Right.
if you're not going to be
Without
open.
that.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what other questions did you have?
Okay, so what advice would you give someone who still feels purity culture is holding them back?
Ooh.
You want me to answer that one?
Yeah, go ahead. You can
Since
start.
I grew up in it. Okay, so that's a hard one. I would, I was there. I get it. I think that as I'm feeling into it, I feel like I've noticed for my own life, it goes back to a lot of the things of which we are talking about with the mask and everything else. And that's reflecting on the personal perspective. If we're looking at purity culture, which is saying, this is the way it's supposed to be, this is the only right expression, this is a way in which you use your body and it's triggering or causes men to sin or whatever, if you're still believing those narratives, if there's a part of you subconsciously that is still holding on to that, those things have valid points or are hold any form of truth to them, then they are going to obviously influence us. So there is healing that has to take place. And I'm not saying it's easy because, like, I just did, back in March, April, have an experience where I realized, I didn't realize that I felt like my role was to satisfy my relationship and I needed to do it right, or that, I didn't realize those things. They were very subconsciously uprooted, rooted. But in realizing them, I have transformed those thoughts, those beliefs. I've looked at them and said, hey, wait, is there truth in this statement? And I feel like the more we can look at the things that are said and focus more towards the self, that we can kind of transmute that information and move beyond that information. When I feel comfortable in my body, then I'm no longer feeling, this. When I feel comfortable in my own expression, I'm no longer feeling this. Like, does these beliefs hold true to my personal beliefs? And if you can do away with that, I feel like that, it can take care of that. I think another note with that is also being able to disconnect from the external perspectives, because a lot of that concept of purity culture was very publicly done. There was a lot of eyes on it. So there can be, it can be hard to, I speak about a lot of sexuality stuff as of lately. I'm feeling comfortable with it, but I'd be lying if I said that there weren't days where I'm like, did I go too far? But it's a process. It's a process. I don't know. What do you think? You seem to sometimes have those like deeper layers, Beckett. Share your wisdom. You're like, well, that's broad, but this is the first step. Okay, rebel, tell us how to do it.
No, I think I think beliefs can be changed.
Yeah.
Beliefs are just a thought we keep thinking over and over and validate them and make them true. So, my thing with anything, purity culture, I don't care. I mean, trauma, all the things, it's a frequency. And if you're continuing to bring that frequency into your present moment, then you have to ask why. Right? Because if it's not valid for you anymore, if you don't align with it anymore, and I understand it can run deep because of the way we were raised, and hence why I was excited to have that anthropologist on the podcast, right? They study cultures, they study how that affects us. We know all these things affect us, but at the end of the day, one of the greatest piece of advice that my mother ever gave me was, at the end of the day, you're the one that's got to go home and go to bed with you.
Yeah, that's good. I
So
like
you
that.
need to be able to look in the mirror and be okay with you, regardless of what everybody else thinks. You can take other people's opinions, you can take other beliefs, and you can sift through them and then determine, what do I believe? And so I would say that's the key there, right? Is to say, we get very tied up in past stories and say, well, this group did this culture did this they grade that. But what I would ask you to consider is, if you're not a part of that group anymore, if you've moved on, why are you continuing to bring that frequency into your present moment? Right? And I'm not saying it's, and people will go, well, that sounds easy. I'm not saying it's easy. This journey of life is never meant to be easy. It's a mindful decision. It's a critical decision, and you have to let go. We get attached to stories, we all do, that we like to continually visit and use those to explain why we do X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
Right? Fill in the blank. I don't care what it is. But at some point, you have to grow up.
Yeah,
Meaning, in a
let
way,
the story go. Yeah.
right? And I say that we all can grow up even when we're 80. Meaning, it's time to let it go. It's going, this doesn't serve me anymore. I'm not part of that anymore. I don't need to talk about it anymore. You know what I mean? It's start to make peace and start to investigate then, what do I believe? Right? Like, I went through something when I was 25 where I did question that. I went through a, what do I believe? And I read a book called God's Breath, and it was all the sacred, holy books of all the different religions. And what I came in was like this thick, which people know I love read book. Yeah. And what I got out of that was, though, that they all believe the same thing. Muslim, Kabbalah, it all came down to the same thing. Treat people how you want to be treated.
Yeah.
It really was that simple, and I think we make it just too difficult. So what I would say is, yes, purity culture did those things. Yes, religion in general was started as a form of government. On the other side, there's been some amazing things that religion has done. Mother Teresa, some of those have done some beautiful, loving things.
Yeah.
It may not have been everybody's path. It's not supposed to be. But if it isn't, and there's some residual belief or something that's holding you back, learn to release it and go, what do I believe now, and why am I bringing that frequency into my present moment and allowing it to ruin or alter what I'm trying to create now? Is that a deeper level for you?
Good job. Well done, sir. Awesome.
Do we have any more questions?
Yes. One more question. And this one, I'm putting you under the bus first. Okay. So
why do we gotta be so volatile about throwing people under the bus? But go ahead.
I like that. Yeah, it feels good. It's making me feel good.
Very masculine of you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I hear you. All right. So what would you say, what guidance or advice would you give to the person who's in a relationship, committed relationship, in which they feel their partner no longer finds them attractive? That's a hard one.
I think it comes down to vulnerability and having an open conversation, and and saying, okay, let's talk about this. Why do you not feel I'm attractive, or what is really going on here, or are we aligned in that way? You know what I mean? Without knowing the specifics, it's a little difficult for me to kind of pinpoint things. But as a broad statement, I would say that the most important thing is to have a conversation and understand. Look, I'm not a big believer in you're with somebody for the rest of your life. It has worked for some. Some
Yeah.
have had amazing marriages and it has worked. But do I believe in everything I've learned that is innately how we're meant to be?
Right.
No. I think there's sometimes where you just outgrow each other and it's time to, you're hearing now a lot of conscious uncoupling. You know what I mean? Of, okay, I've learned everything. Because what I watched years ago was, human beings date based on needs. That's how we date.
Okay.
That's just a very scientific thing. So if you don't have housing, or you don't have childcare, you're going to find a partner who's going to provide that for you. So as your needs get met, your dating requirements change. Right?
Yeah.
So if you're that's why people will say you date better when you're self-sufficient, when you know what you need, because now it's you're not dating out of a need so much, it's a choice.
Yeah.
If you can't add to my life, meaning we can't co-create, then I don't need to be with you.
Yeah.
So I guess I would just lay that foundation down there, you know what I mean, and say,
Yeah.
but I think having an honest conversation and being open to whatever comes out, and hopefully the partner can have an honest, if it's like, well,
Right.
they're bald, and I'm just taking stereotypical couple, I don't know if they're straight or whatever, but let's just say they're straight, and he's bald and fat and whatever, and he's like, well, you're not, an hourglass figure, and you're not I mean, come on.
Yeah, yeah. Which is interesting because, like, I don't know, for me personally, I feel like, I mean, everybody has different expressions. And for me, it's not necessarily always physical,
Right.
Visual, you could say, but rather the engagement between. Like in that example, I would like to think that if there was a situation like that, for me, intimacy is just even having the vulnerability
Yes.
to have that conversation. And especially if your partner is able to well receive it on the other side, or to at least hear you out, that to me is already establishing that bond. But also, to your point, I do feel like the question in my mind goes to, I in my life has, as someone who has felt like, coming from the background I did, I was like, okay, I'm just going to repress my sexual expression. It's, oh, I don't need that. I don't need to feel those feelings. And I can name many ways in which it had influence to my personal vitality of life. I was sleeping a lot. I was overly ambitious in my career. There was all of these things and this undertone of agitation so there is, to this question, a layer also to be considered of the importance of having that bond, and whether that can be rekindled by either the honest conversation, or, to your point, the relaxing a little more into the concept of not seeing things as failures, but rather times and seasons and chapters.
Right.
And sometimes that relationship, if it served a purpose and it's lacking in life force mutually from both sides, then you have to take a look at what's going on here, and whether or not continuing in a stagnant circumstance is beneficial to either parties, because if it's something that you're mutually feeling a disconnect, staying is just going to continue to drain your life force energy. That's my perspective.
Well, yeah, I mean, and again, I think it's being able to talk openly and honestly with each other and not judging each other, not calling each other names, and being able to say, what do you need now as the human being you are? What do I need now? And are we still in alignment? And can we revitalize this? What does a marriage to both of us look like now?
Ooh, and I
Or
have
a
another
relationship,
piece.
or whatever it is.
Yeah. Can I add another piece to that too?
No.
Go
Yes, you can.
going back to the mask. Okay, so that's the other thing too, as being a human design reader and someone into astrology. I believe that our aura communicates our essence of who we are. When we're wearing masks and not being authentic to our desires and who we are, it offers a miscommunication to the people around us. So it could be something also where in having that conversation, you could also consider, okay, what is, what are my desires? What am I, what are my expressions? Am I embodying them? Because if you're not embodying your authentic expression, you're offering a miscommunication to the people around you. So maybe it can be something, a conversation of saying, yes, I feel like you're no longer attracted to me. I'm realizing these are certain things I feel that I have desires of, or expressions, way I want to, show my love to you. That also could, to your point earlier, you're like, you cannot know, you can be with someone long term and not really know them. So perhaps that conversation could spark, necessary steps towards getting to know each other's desires better, and embodying that more authentically could reunite a spark, possibly.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to you have to know what you need and want
Right.
before you have that conversation. And they have to know that too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Which is
and
hard
be
because
able,
some people don't want to do that, do
no,
that
they
work.
don't want to do that work, and they don't want to be honest with themselves. And it kind of, it kind of reminds me of the Disney movie Mulan.
I like Mulan.
Yeah, when that woman comes to her and says, are you basically, are you, then she's like, no, I'm this warrior, I'm this guy. And she's like, no, you're not.
That's why I like Mulan.
Well, right. But she's like, well, no, but no, I'm not.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, you lose all your powers by the fact that you are lying, basically.
Yeah.
You're wearing this mask, and so it's hindering your powers. And so when you can look at that, that's pretty much what we're saying. When you don't come out and take off the masks, and I know we said it was the topic of this was taboo and tantric, and the key to understanding that though is this is where you have to start to get to that tantric connection of authenticity. Because if you can't be authentic with yourself,
right,
you're not going to be authentic with a partner, and you can't experience that transcendence connection.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't connect on fakeness. It doesn't connect on inauthentic auras. It just doesn't. And so that's where it's getting really clear about who you are, what do I believe, and what do I want.
Right.
And am I embodying these things? Because that's the key, is you have to embody it. It's one thing that we can share these knowledges, but you have to learn to integrate them. You have to learn to embody them, and there's a practice in that. And I think that's the key. People rely a lot on other things, but you have to learn to now be the change you want in your life.
Yeah. You have to, especially like what you said with Tantra and stuff, it's like the ability to be so present in the moment and feel so comfortable and authentic in your own expression, connected to divinity and your higher self, to feel like the god and goddess. And when you do that, it allows a completely open heart ability to also then look at your partner in the same regard, and being able to see their highest expression and them as their highest self and as the god or goddess in energy. So to do that, that's a lot of work, a lot of things, a lot of layers to kind of go through to have those really powerful transcendent experiences sexually.
Agreed. So on that note, I think we're going to leave it there because we're just over an hour.
Sounds good.
Thank you guys for watching this. If you were tuned in or listening to this later, I appreciate it. Cassandra, do you want to share with them your latest offering?
Sure, yeah, I can do that. So yeah, I am presently doing a lot of sexual astrology readings. Just kind of, we talked a lot in this podcast of like releasing the mask and coming into understanding yourself. And so, yeah, astrology is absolutely a way in which you can do that. So, you can go to my site and click on sexual astrology and read a little bit more about it if you're interested in discovering more about yourself as it relates to partnership, love, sexuality, and some kinks. So, yeah.
And I will say, everybody that has had it, I've had some friends totally blown away by it. So I highly recommend it. Thank you for being here with me today and chatting.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
And
Awesome.
if you guys enjoy this, please like, subscribe, share, rate, and also leave comments or message me on any topics you would like me to cover in some of these lives and any type of guests. Until then, we'll see you next time. Stay your unique selves and keep shining your bright light. Till next time, guys.